Master's daughter says, I'll give YOUMY virginity, IFYOU save METHE lonely slave trembled ANDDID this. They said the plantation had no secrets, yet on one storm-bent night, a promise was spoken that would change every life bound to that land. A master's daughter, raised in silk yet trapped by fear, stood at the edge of ruin. A lonely enslaved man, hardened by silence and survival, faced a choice no one like him was ever meant to make. What she offered was not flesh, but fate itself, a vow born of terror and hope. And when he acted, the plantation would never breathe the same again. This is a story of choices made in fear, loyalty forged in fire, and a promise that tested the meaning of honor. If you enjoy emotionally rich, dramatic stories drawn from history's darkest corners, please like, subscribe, and support the channel. The year was 1847, and the Caldwell Plantation lay stretched across the lowlands like a silent kingdom built on fear. Spanish moss hung heavy from the oaks, and the air smelled of soil, sweat, and unspoken sorrow. Elijah Moore was known as the Quiet One. An enslaved man in his late 20s, Elijah had learned early that silence could be armor. He worked the stables and fields, his strength unquestioned, his thoughts carefully hidden. While others sang or whispered dreams, Elijah listened to footsteps, to tones of voice, to danger approaching before it arrived. Clara Caldwell, the master's only daughter, was nothing like the women Elijah had known from afar. She was grown, educated, and deeply lonely within the grand house that watched the fields like a judge. Her mother had passed years earlier, and her father ruled with cold order. To him, Clara was property too, just dressed better. Then there was Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell, the master's new wife. Polite in public, calculating in private, she watched everything and everyone with unsettling patience. None of them knew that the plantation stood on the edge of a moment that would bind their fates together. A moment where fear would demand a promise, and courage would answer. The days following that uneasy calm did not soften the air on the Caldwell plantation, they sharpened it. Elijah felt it first. He sensed danger the way some men sensed rain, in the tightening of the chest and the way voices shifted when his back was turned. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell had begun to watch him more closely. Her footsteps appeared where they never had before, near the stables at dusk, along the servants' corridor after supper. Her smile remained polite, but her eyes weighed him like a measure. Clara noticed it too. From her bedroom window, she saw how Mrs. Caldwell lingered when Elijah passed, how questions were asked that sounded harmless but weren't. Clara's loneliness had long been her companion, but fear had recently joined it. Her father had been speaking of alliances, of suitors with sharp smiles and heavier expectations. She was no longer simply his daughter. She was an asset to be exchanged. One evening, as thunder rolled low across the fields, Clara slipped away from the main house under the excuse of prayer. She moved carefully, skirts gathered, heart pounding, until she reached the old carriage shed behind the stables. Elijah was there, repairing a broken harness by lantern light. He stiffened when he saw her. "Miss Clara," he said quietly, lowering his eyes. "You don't need to do that," she whispered, though she knew the danger in saying so. "Not here." He hesitated, then nodded once. "You shouldn't be out alone." "That's why I came," she replied. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with urgency. Elijah sensed it immediately. He set the harness aside and turned fully toward her, keeping careful distance. "They're watching me," she said. "My stepmother. She knows something is coming. I don't know what, but I can feel it." Elijah said nothing. He had learned that silence often invited truth. "My father plans to send me away," Clara continued, "to marry a man I've never met. He arrives in 3 days." The words fell like stones. "And Mrs. Caldwell?" Elijah asked. Clara swallowed. "She wants me gone. I heard her say it, said the house would finally be hers." Thunder cracked overhead, and in that moment, fear broke through Clara's composure. "If I go," she whispered, "I won't come back the same. I won't come back at all." Elijah felt something twist inside him, something dangerous. He had survived by avoiding attachment, by keeping his heart folded small. But here stood a woman trapped by power, just as surely as he was trapped by chains, though hers were silk-lined. "I can't protect you," he said carefully. "Not the way you mean." Clara stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You already have. Every time you warned me without words. Every time you stood between me and something cruel." That was when footsteps echoed nearby. Mrs. Caldwell's voice floated through the rain. "Is someone out here?" Elijah reacted instantly. He moved Clara behind a stack of crates and stepped into the open, lantern raised. "Just finishing repairs, ma'am," he said evenly. Mrs. Caldwell appeared at the shed's edge, her shawl wrapped tightly. Her eyes flicked past Elijah, sharp and searching. "Working late," she observed. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. "You are a dependable man, Elijah. Loyal." Her gaze lingered, then she turned away. "See that you remain so." When she was gone, Clara exhaled shackily. "That's what I mean," she said. "She knows how to wait." Elijah looked at her then, not as master's daughter or forbidden presence, but as someone standing at the edge of something irreversible. "What are you asking of me?" he asked quietly. Clara hesitated. Her next words were heavy, imperfect, born of desperation rather than design. "If it comes to it," she said, voice barely sound, "I will give up everything I am promised to be, if you help me escape what they are forcing." The promise was not about flesh. It was about fate, about choosing her own life in a world that denied choice to both of them. Elijah felt his hands tremble. To help her would mean risk beyond punishment. It would mean betrayal of the order that kept him alive. And yet, doing nothing would mean watching her disappear into a future built on obedience and fear. "I don't know how," he said. "But you will," Clara replied softly. "Because you're the only one who sees me as human." Lightning split the sky, sealing the moment. From the shadows of the plantation house, Mrs. Caldwell watched the lantern glow fade, and she smiled. Because now she knew exactly where to strike. The storm arrived the same evening the stranger did. Carriages rolled through the plantation gates just before dusk, their wheels cutting deep lines into the soaked earth. Elijah stood near the stables, rain clinging to his shoulders, as he watched the visitor step down, a tall man in a dark coat, posture rigid, eyes already measuring what could be taken. This was the man Clara was meant to marry. Inside the house, candles burned low as dinner was served. Clara sat stiff-backed at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her father spoke warmly of land and legacy, while Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell smiled with careful satisfaction. Every glance she cast toward Clara carried a silent warning. Clara barely tasted the food. Her eyes flicked once, only once, toward the window facing the yard. She knew Elijah would be there. He always was when danger pressed close. And tonight, danger pressed hard. After supper, Mrs. Caldwell rose and placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. "You must be exhausted," she said sweetly. "Why don't you retire early? Tomorrow will be important." Clara felt the message beneath the words. She stood, excused herself, and climbed the stairs with measured calm, though her heart was pounding wildly. In her room, she locked the door and moved quickly. She changed into plain clothing she had hidden days earlier and gathered a small bundle, letters, her mother's ribbon, nothing more. Then she waited. Below, Elijah wrestled with himself. He had spent the day preparing what he never thought he would attempt, loosening a fence post near the far marsh, memorizing patrol patterns, counting seconds between lantern passes. Every step toward helping Clara pulled him closer to ruin. But some lines, once seen, could not be unseen. Near midnight, a soft signal came from the upper window, 3 faint taps of glass. Elijah moved. He guided Clara through the dark path toward the marsh, rain masking their steps. Neither spoke. Words would only slow them now. They were nearly there when a voice cut through the night. "Running away, dear?" Mrs. Caldwell stepped into the lantern light, dry beneath an oilskin cloak. Behind her stood 2 men, plantation guards, hands resting near their belts. Clara froze. "Elijah," Mrs. Caldwell continued, her tone calm, "I warned you about loyalty." Elijah stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Clara and the guards. His heart thundered in his chest, but his voice stayed steady. "She didn't choose this," he said. Mrs. Caldwell laughed softly. "Choice is a luxury, one neither of you truly has." The guards moved closer. Then another voice rang out, sharp, commanding. "Enough!" Mr. Caldwell emerged from the darkness, his face pale with shock and fury. He looked from Clara to Elijah, then to his wife. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Mrs. Caldwell's smile faltered, but only briefly. "Your daughter was being led astray," she said. I intervened. Clara stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "No," she said. "You orchestrated this. You wanted me gone, by marriage or disgrace." Her father stared at her. "Is that true?" Silence stretched. Rain dripped from the trees like ticking clocks. Mrs. Caldwell's expression hardened. "I wanted what was owed to me," she snapped. "This house, this name." The truth hung heavy. Mr. Caldwell's shoulders sagged under it. He looked at Elijah then, not as property, but as a man standing unbroken in the storm. "You," he said slowly, "you risked everything." Elijah met his gaze. "Yes, sir." "For what?" Elijah didn't look at Clara. He didn't need to. "For what's right." The guards shifted uneasily. Mr. Caldwell closed his eyes, then made a choice that would echo long after the rain stopped. "Let her go," he said. Mrs. Caldwell gasped. "You can't mean—" "I can," he replied. "And you will leave this house before dawn." The storm seemed to pause, as if listening. Clara's breath caught. She turned to Elijah, tears shining in her eyes, not of fear now, but of something deeper. "I meant what I said," she whispered. "Not as a bargain, but as truth. I would have given up everything." Elijah nodded once. "You already did," he said softly. "They did not touch. They did not need to." As Clara disappeared into the marsh path toward freedom, Elijah remained behind, soaking wet, heart exposed, fate uncertain. Mrs. Caldwell was escorted away in silence, and the plantation, once ruled by fear alone, stood changed, its greatest secret finally spoken aloud. Morning came slowly to the Caldwell plantation, as if the land itself hesitated to awaken after what had transpired. The rain had passed, leaving behind a heavy mist that clung to the fields and softened the sharp edges of the night's events. Yet nothing felt softened in truth. Everything had changed. Elijah stood alone near the stables, his clothes still damp, his body aching not from labor, but from uncertainty. He had not slept. Each sound, the creak of the house, the distant call of a bird, felt like a verdict waiting to be spoken. By sunrise, word had spread. The guards whispered. The field hands noticed the tension. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell's rooms were stripped bare, her belongings loaded quietly onto a wagon before most had risen. No explanations were offered, but the absence itself spoke loudly. Mr. Caldwell summoned Elijah just after breakfast. The master sat heavily behind his desk, the lines on his face deeper than before. He looked older now, like a man who had lost more than pride in a single night. "You should not still be here," he said, not unkindly. Elijah stood straight. "I know, sir." Silence stretched between them. "You could have fled," Mr. Caldwell continued, "taken advantage of the chaos." "I wasn't running," Elijah replied. "I was standing." Mr. Caldwell studied him for a long moment. "That may be the bravest and most foolish thing I have seen in years." He opened a drawer and removed a folded document, worn at the edges. "I cannot undo the world we live in," he said quietly, "but I can decide what kind of man I will be in it." He placed the paper on the desk between them. Elijah recognized the seal even before he read the words. Freedom. Not a promise. Not a favor. A legal truth. "You saved my daughter," Mr. Caldwell said. "You did not ask for reward. But I will not pretend I owe you nothing." Elijah's hands trembled as he reached for the paper. He had imagined this moment in fragments across his life, but never like this, never earned through defiance. "Thank you," he said, voice low. "There is more," Mr. Caldwell added. "You must leave this land, not because I wish it, but because others will not forgive what they know you dared to do." Elijah nodded. He had already understood that freedom came with exile. Before he left, he walked the familiar paths one last time, the stable doors, the fence by the marsh, the oak tree where he had once rested in silence. Each place felt like a chapter closing. At the edge of the property, he paused. Clara had left no note, no sign, but he felt her presence in the quiet courage of the morning. She had chosen her future. So had he. Days later, miles away, Clara traveled under a borrowed name. The world beyond the plantation was harsher than she had imagined, but it was hers. Every step she took without permission strengthened her resolve. At night, she remembered Elijah, not with longing alone, but with gratitude. He had not claimed her promise. He had honored it by protecting her choice. Back at the plantation, Mr. Caldwell dismantled more than old routines. He reduced patrols. He loosened rules. The land felt different, not free, but less cruel. Some whispered of what Elijah had done. Others spoke of him as a cautionary tale. But among a quiet few, his name became something else entirely. A reminder that courage could exist even where chains once ruled, and that one night, one choice, could bend the direction of many lives. Freedom did not arrive for Elijah as a celebration. It came as distance. Weeks passed as he traveled northward, working when he could, sleeping where he was allowed, learning the unfamiliar weight of choosing his own direction. The paper granting his freedom stayed folded close to his chest, not as protection, but as proof that his life now belonged to himself. Yet freedom carried echoes. At every stop, Elijah heard fragments of the old world in new forms, rules unwritten but enforced, kindness offered cautiously, danger lurking behind polite smiles. Still, each morning he woke without order shouted into the dawn. That alone felt like a miracle earned in bloodless defiance. He settled eventually in a small riverside town where no one asked too many questions. He repaired boats, mended fences, and spoke little. But when he did speak, people listened. There was steadiness in him, an unspoken history that shaped his words. At night, Clara returned to his thoughts, not as regret, not as longing that wounded, but as a presence tied to a choice that had saved them both. Clara's life, meanwhile, unfolded with quiet determination. Under her new name, she found work teaching children to read, something her mother had once dreamed of doing. The days were long, the pay modest, but for the first time, her worth was measured not by marriage or inheritance, but by effort. She carried scars too. There were nights she woke startled, expecting locked doors or commands she must obey. But each dawn reminded her that fear no longer ruled her steps. She never forgot Elijah. She honored him not by searching for him, but by living fully, by proving that the promise she had made was never about surrender, but about survival and dignity. Back at the Caldwell Plantation, change came slowly. Mr. Caldwell aged visibly, his authority softened by reflection. He did not become a hero, nor did he dismantle the system that had built his wealth. But something in him had shifted. He granted small mercies. He listened more than he spoke. And when people spoke of Elijah, he did not silence them. He was a man who stood when others bowed, he said once. No more, no less. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell vanished into obscurity, her ambition having devoured its own future. Those who chased power without conscience often found themselves alone at the end of the road. Years passed. One autumn afternoon, Elijah stood by the river repairing a boat when he heard a familiar voice speak his name, not loudly, not urgently, but with certainty. Elijah Moore. He turned. Clara stood a few steps away, older now, stronger in ways that mattered. Her eyes held recognition without surprise, as if this meeting had always been inevitable. They regarded one another in silence, two lives shaped by a single night, now standing on equal ground. You look well, Elijah said finally. So do you, Clara replied. Free! They walked along the riverbank, speaking of ordinary things, work, seasons, the way time reshapes memory. They did not speak of the promise directly. They did not need to. What you did, Clara said quietly. You never took advantage of it. Elijah nodded. Because it wasn't meant to be taken. She smiled then, not with sorrow, but with peace. I wanted you to know, she said, that what you gave me, I've used it well. Elijah felt a deep, steady warmth settle in his chest. That's all I hoped, he replied. When they parted, it was without regret. Some bonds are not meant to be possessed. They are meant to be honored. And in honoring them, both souls are freed. Time, like a patient witness, continued its slow march forward. Decades passed, and the world Elijah and Clara had known faded into history, reshaped by wars, movements, and voices once silenced now rising with force. But some stories survive not because they were written down, rather because they were carried, carefully, from one generation to the next. Elijah Moore lived a long life by the river. He never sought fame, nor did he speak often of the plantation. When asked where he came from, he simply said, "A place that taught me who I did not wish to be." He became known for his fairness, his calm judgment, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. People trusted him, not because he demanded respect, but because he offered it freely. In time, Elijah took a wife who knew his past without needing every detail. Together, they built a home where no one bowed out of fear. Children grew under that roof knowing that dignity was not granted, it was inherent. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Elijah sat by the river and watched the current carry leaves downstream. He thought of a storm long ago, of a promise spoken in desperation, and of how restraint, not possession, had defined his strength. Clara's life unfolded differently, but no less meaningfully. She became a teacher known for her patience and quiet authority. Her students learned more than letters from her. They learned that courage could be gentle, and that independence was built step by careful step. She never married, not out of bitterness, but because she chose companionship only where equality lived. In her small home, she kept a ribbon, faded, fragile, tied to a memory of escape and survival. It reminded her not of fear, but of choice. When asked why she never returned south, Clara answered simply, "Some doors are meant to close behind us." The Caldwell Plantation did not endure. After Mr. Caldwell's passing, the land was sold and divided. The great house fell into disrepair, its wide halls echoing only with dust and silence. Locals said the place felt lighter once it stood empty, as though the earth itself had exhaled. Yet among the stories told in nearby towns, one remained. They spoke of a man who had nothing, yet risked everything. They spoke of a woman who refused to be traded for comfort. They spoke of a night when power faltered, not by force, but by conscience. No statues were built, no songs were officially written. But sometimes, when storms rolled in at night, elders told their children of a lantern glowing near the marsh, of footsteps choosing courage over obedience, and of how a single decision can ripple far beyond its moment. History often remembers battles and names carved in stone. But the truest legacies are quieter. They live in the way a person chooses restraint over gain. They endure in the courage to protect without claiming. They echo in every life made freer because someone once said, "This is where the line is drawn." And so the story ends where it truly began, not with power, not with possession, but with a promise honored by action rather than words. A promise that changed two lives, and in its own small way, helped change the world. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share.